Meghan Markle, she's your favourite. We have to talk about her 45th birthday. It went publicly unacknowledged by the royal family on Tuesday.
The birthday celebration is over when the numbers begin to unravel. Meghan Markle has just turned 45, yet an old magazine page, Samantha Markle's, claims. And a trail of conflicting dates are forcing people to look twice at the story they knew. But here's the thing, one questionable record means little. Several timelines pointing in different directions are another matter, and that's when Samantha's decades-old accusations become relevant again. So, did Samantha expose Meghan's real age, or is there another explanation hiding in the timeline? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The birthday raised questions, and that is where the birthday itself becomes the first real clue. Picture the moment. August 4th arrives, the celebration begins, and Meghan Markle is publicly presented as 45. On paper, the calculation is straightforward. The commonly reported birth date is August 4th, 1981, which places her at 45 in 2026. Nothing complicated there. So, why did this particular birthday suddenly send people back through old records, old interviews, and most importantly, Samantha Markle's earlier claims? Okay, so let's talk about Samantha. For years, Meghan's older half-sister has challenged parts of the public story surrounding their family. Samantha has been portrayed by critics as bitter, while supporters have argued that she has been raising questions that deserve examination. Whatever someone thinks of her personally, her name matters here because she has repeatedly disputed aspects of Meghan's timeline. But here's where things changed. Instead of treating Samantha's accusations as the entire story, people began comparing them with material that appeared to exist independently of the family feud. And suddenly the question became much more specific. Not whether Samantha likes Meghan, not whether their relationship is damaged, but whether the dates attached to Meghan's life actually fit together. Then comes the document that sent this controversy into another direction. A disputed page from 17 magazine, reportedly published in March 1997. The reference material describes a listing for a Meghan Markle in Los Angeles, with the age given as 21. Now, stop there for a second, because this is exactly where the story needs caution. A magazine listing is not the same thing as an authenticated birth certificate, and one mistaken age could simply be an editorial error. Still, the detail is difficult to ignore because the name and location reportedly correspond with Meghan. If the person identified on that page was indeed the future Duchess of Sussex, the arithmetic creates a very different birth year possibility from 1981. And that is precisely why the page has become so important to the debate. What nobody realized was that the birthday controversy would not stay focused on one old magazine. The moment that page entered the conversation, Samantha's claims suddenly had something new to collide with. A paper trail that appeared to tell another story. And now we have to look closely at that page, because if it really did identify Meghan as 21 in 1997, the numbers become impossible to casually dismiss so easily. What if that magazine page was only the beginning? Why does another document reportedly point toward a timeline that raises even more questions about Meghan's past? And what happens when the dates, names, and details are placed side by side? Could the next piece finally change everything? Let's find out. The magazine timeline raises doubts. And this is where the story gets interesting, because that birthday question now leads straight to a dusty magazine page from 1997. Imagine opening an old issue decades later and finding a familiar name, sitting quietly among a group of young women from Los Angeles. According to the material discussed in the reference, the name was Meghan Markle, and beside it was an age, 21. Okay, so let's slow down here, because this is the point where a fascinating claim can easily become an exaggerated one. The reported page appeared in a March 1997 issue of 17 magazine, and it allegedly identified a Meghan Markle from Los Angeles as 21. If that identification is accurate, the arithmetic immediately becomes uncomfortable. Someone who was 21 in March 1997 would generally have been born around 1975 or 1976, depending on their birthday. Now compare that with the birth date publicly associated with Meghan, August 4th, 1981. Under that timeline, Meghan would have been 15 when the magazine was published. That is not a tiny difference. We're talking about roughly 6 years, which is exactly why this old page has become such a powerful piece of the online debate. But here's the thing, the page does not automatically prove anything. Magazines make mistakes. Names can be entered incorrectly, ages can be printed incorrectly, and there could potentially be another person named Meghan Markle connected to Los Angeles. Those possibilities have to remain on the table if we're going to take the investigation seriously. And this is where it gets interesting. Supporters of the alternative timeline point to the fact that the disputed entry reportedly contains more than just the name. The location is said to match, and the person described is connected to the same city associated with Meghan's early life. That combination is what keeps people coming back to the page. Still, there is a crucial distinction between something looking suspicious and something being proven without independently authenticated archival material establishing exactly who the magazine was describing. The page remains evidence in a controversy, not a final verdict. What nobody realized was that this would become bigger than one questionable age printed decades ago. Because once people started comparing the magazine against Samantha Markle's own claims and the family's reported timeline, another set of numbers began appearing. And that is the moment this story stops being about one magazine mistake and becomes a much larger question. How many different versions of Meghan's age have existed over the years? And that leaves a deeper mystery. Was Samantha remembering the past differently? Or did another detail quietly change the timeline? What exactly do her own records reveal, and why does that discrepancy matter now? The next piece of evidence may force everything we thought we knew into question. Stay glued. Samantha's timeline gets complicated. And now Samantha Markle steps back into the picture, carrying a history with Meghan that makes this controversy far more complicated than an old magazine page. For years, Samantha has challenged parts of her younger sister's public story.
For negative effect to self-publication, I think it's been quite hurtful to our family, how hurtful it's been to my sister.
While critics have dismissed her as bitter or resentful. But whether you trust Samantha or not, there is one reason her claims keep resurfacing. She actually belongs inside the family timeline. Okay, so let's talk about that timeline. Samantha was born in 1964, according to the material examined in the reference. Meghan's publicly reported birth year is 1981. Put those dates together, and you get a 17-year difference. That sounds straightforward until Samantha's own descriptions of their relationship enter the picture. She has spoken about Meghan as a younger sister she remembers growing up with, creating a picture that some people believe feels different from the enormous age gap suggested by the official timeline. But here's where things changed. Samantha did not simply appear years later and announce a completely different birth year without complication. Her own published material reportedly listed Meghan's birth year as 1981, although it contained a different day in August. That matters because Samantha cannot be presented as someone who consistently documented one alternative year from the beginning publicly. And this is where the story gets interesting. The controversy isn't really about choosing Samantha over Meghan. It's about putting Samantha's statements beside the other pieces of information and asking whether they create a timeline that makes sense. One claim can be dismissed, one memory can be questioned, but when family recollections are compared with old publications and statements attributed to Meghan herself, the audience naturally starts doing the arithmetic. There is another wrinkle too. The reference discusses statements suggesting different age gaps between Meghan and her older siblings. Those calculations do not neatly reinforce the same 17-year difference. Again, that does not prove Samantha's alternative interpretation, but it does make the family chronology harder to summarize with one simple number. What nobody expected was that Samantha's biggest contribution to this mystery might not be a single explosive revelation at all. It may be the contradictions surrounding the timeline itself. She raises the question, but the evidence still has to answer it. And now, instead of relying on Samantha's memory, we have to examine Meghan's own words, because one timeline described by Meghan reportedly produces a very different calculation. What happens when a childhood memory collides with a documented timeline? Could one seemingly harmless detail shift everything we thought we knew? And why do other dates begin raising questions at exactly the wrong moment? Stay tuned. Meghan's own words shift, and now the investigation turns in a direction Samantha cannot control.
Suggest the ability to align with issues of womanhood and suffering.
Meghan's own words. According to the reference, a 2018 briefing note became important because Meghan reportedly described being 2 years old when her mother, Doria, left Thomas Markle, while her older siblings were described as being 15 and 17. On the surface, that sounds like a simple family memory. But once the numbers are placed together, the timeline starts moving. Okay, so let's do the arithmetic carefully. If Meghan was 2 and an older sibling was 15, the difference would be 13 years. Yet the commonly reported timeline places Samantha roughly 17 years older than Meghan. That gap matters because it creates a question about the family chronology. Still, one statement cannot independently prove that Meghan was born in another year. Memories can be imperfect, wording can be imprecise, and family stories can change with time. But here's where things changed. The controversy became less about what Samantha claimed and more about what Meghan herself had reportedly put into writing. Suddenly, critics had another timeline to examine, and this one was connected directly to Meghan's own account of her childhood. Then another childhood story enters the picture. Meghan has repeatedly spoken about writing to Procter & Gamble after seeing a controversial dish soap advertisement. The story became part of her public identity, particularly because she has described herself as being 11 when she challenged the advertisement. Yet, the reference points to a 1993 television appearance in which she was reportedly described differently, with the clip presenting an age of 12. That might sound like a tiny discrepancy, 1 year. Nothing dramatic, right? And honestly, by itself, it isn't. A child remembering whether she was 11 or 12 decades later does not establish deception. But when you're investigating a disputed timeline, even small differences suddenly become interesting because they show how easily personal history can shift in retelling. And this is where the story gets bigger. Samantha is no longer the only person whose statements are being examined. Meghan's family timeline, her childhood memories, and old media appearances are now being placed side by side. What nobody realized was that the next discrepancy would involve a completely different childhood story, one involving a yogurt shop, a celebrity encounter, and a date that critics say doesn't fit neatly with the official timeline. And once that story is placed against the calendar, the question becomes much harder to ignore. One disputed memory can be explained away, but what happens when another timeline raises an entirely different question? Could these stories reveal nothing more than imperfect recollections? Or is there something deeper connecting them? And what does the next piece of evidence reveal? Keep watching. Childhood memories meet dates. And now, the timeline takes us somewhere even more personal, back to Meghan's childhood, where two familiar stories begin creating an uncomfortable calendar puzzle. One involves a yogurt shop, the other involves a famous actress. Neither story by itself proves anything about Meghan's birth year, but together they raise questions that refuse to disappear. Okay, so let's start with Humphrey Yogurt. Meghan has reportedly described working there when she was 13.
My first job was when I was 13 at a frozen yogurt shop called Humphrey Yogurt.
Presenting the experience as part of her early working life. It sounds harmless enough, a teenager earning money, learning responsibility, and getting a taste of ordinary life before Hollywood. But according to the material in the reference, former management reportedly disputed whether someone that young was ever employed there. Now, that distinction matters. A disagreement over an employee's age is not proof that Meghan lied about her birth date. Businesses can have incomplete records, memories can fade, and stories told years later can become simplified. Still, when the entire investigation revolves around age, a detail like this naturally attracts attention. But here's where things changed. The yogurt shop story reportedly included another detail. Meghan said she encountered actress Yasmin Bleeth while working there and congratulated her on an advertising campaign. Sounds like a sweet childhood memory, right? Except the timing becomes the interesting part. According to the reference, the advertising campaign Meghan remembered was associated with a later period than the one that would fit neatly with her claimed age of 13. That creates a chronological problem. If Meghan was 13 at the time she described, could the commercial she remembered have already existed? And this is where we have to slow down again. A childhood memory can compress dates. A person can remember meeting someone without remembering the exact year. An advertisement can also be remembered by association rather than precise chronology. So these details cannot, on their own, establish a different birth year. What they do establish is something more subtle. Meghan's childhood stories contain dates that critics believe deserve closer examination. One mismatch might be forgetfulness, another might be coincidence. But when several stories begin producing different calculations, people naturally stop asking whether one memory is imperfect and start asking whether the larger timeline has been reconstructed over time. And that question takes us beyond Samantha, because next, the investigation leaves childhood memories behind and enters the paper trail, where professional records may tell a very different story. And that raises the question, where is the one record that could settle everything? Why has it remained so difficult to verify? And what might it reveal about the timeline everyone thought they understood? The next discovery could change the entire story. So what comes next? Stay with us. The records tell another story. And now the investigation leaves childhood memories behind and enters the world of professional records, where a date can sit quietly for years before somebody notices it. This is where the story becomes harder to dismiss as nothing more than a family disagreement, because the documents being discussed were connected to Meghan's professional history. Okay, so let's start with IMDb. According to the reference, Meghan's professional profile reportedly once showed a different birth year before being changed. The year discussed was 1977 rather than 1981. That is a striking difference, especially when placed beside the other timelines we have already examined. But there is an important warning here. Online databases can be edited, corrected, or changed for many reasons. A screenshot claiming an earlier entry is therefore something to investigate, not automatically proof of what an official record said. And this is where it gets interesting. The question isn't simply whether an older IMDb page existed. It is whether that information can be independently authenticated, dated, and connected conclusively to Meghan. Without that verification, the alleged change remains another piece of the puzzle rather than the missing answer. Then we reach Northwestern University, where Meghan officially graduated in 2003.
That she graduated from Northwestern University with double majors in international relations and theatre.
On the commonly reported 1981 timeline, she would have been around 22 when she graduated. That fits neatly. There is no immediate explosion here, no dramatic contradiction sitting in plain sight, and that's precisely why this part matters. Some pieces of the official timeline actually work, but critics have pointed to classmates, alumni information, and old photographs, while arguing that Meghan's social circle and university timeline deserve another look. The reference discusses claims involving people connected to her student years, but those accounts are not enough by themselves to establish that Meghan was born in 1977, 1976, or any other alternative year. What we're seeing now is something more complicated than a simple accusation. Some records appear to raise questions. Other records fit the official timeline. Some claims rely on memories, while others depend on screenshots or historical databases whose original versions are difficult to verify. And that distinction is crucial. A professional profile is not a birth certificate. A photograph is not a civil registration. A remembered conversation is not an authenticated document. Yet, when several imperfect pieces point toward the same mystery, people naturally want to know what the definitive record says. And that's where we arrive at the document that should settle everything, the official birth record itself. Because if that document can conclusively establish the date, the entire argument changes in an instant. And that question leads somewhere even more unexpected. Why has Samantha continued to matter in a story supposedly settled years ago? What does her version reveal about the evidence surrounding Meghan's birth, and what happens when that version collides with the records? The missing record matters most. And now, we reach the point where every old magazine page, family memory, interview, and professional profile eventually leads the birth certificate. Because after everything we've examined, one question remains stubbornly simple. What does the official record actually say? Okay, so let's talk about why that matters. A magazine can print the wrong age. An online database can be edited. A childhood memory can shift by a year. Even relatives can remember family timelines differently. But an authenticated civil record would carry an entirely different level of weight. It would not automatically explain every disputed story, but it could establish the basic fact. This entire controversy keeps circling Meghan's actual date of birth, and here's where things changed. The public debate often jumps from "there are inconsistencies" straight to "therefore another birth year must be true." Those are two completely different conclusions. Finding contradictions can justify questions. It does not, by itself, prove that the alternative answer is correct. That distinction becomes especially important when people start talking about Meghan's marriage, royal status, or the succession. The reference raises dramatic possibilities, including whether false information could create legal consequences. But an alleged age discrepancy alone cannot establish that Meghan's marriage is invalid, that titles disappear, or that her children's position changes. Those would require specific evidence and legal findings, not internet calculations. So, why does the argument keep growing? Part of the answer is the apparent absence of a publicly available definitive document that everyone can independently examine. Without that final piece, every older record becomes another clue. Samantha's statements become another clue. The magazine becomes another clue. The conflicting childhood stories become another clue. And this is where the emotional side of the story becomes impossible to ignore. Samantha Markle has spent years making claims about her sister while being dismissed by many people as jealous, angry, or unreliable.
And why it would have been so easy to be honest about who she is.
Yet, even if Samantha does not possess the final proof, her persistence has helped keep attention on questions that might otherwise have disappeared beneath years of celebrity coverage. What nobody realized was that Samantha's importance may not be that she can produce one document and end everything. It may be that she keeps forcing people to compare the stories. And now, we're left with the question that has followed this controversy from the beginning. If the official timeline is completely straightforward, why do so many conflicting versions continue circulating? That brings us to where every piece of this timeline has to be placed on the same table. And Samantha's role looks very different once we see the whole picture. And that leaves one unsettling possibility. Are the conflicting timelines revealing something deeper, or simply the result of years of confusion? Which record could finally change the entire story? And what happens when the evidence is examined one final time? Let's unravel the mystery. The timeline faces its test. And now, after following all those threads, we finally reach the question underneath this story. What can actually be proven? Okay, so let's put everything on the table. Meghan's August 4th, 1981, birthday means she will be 45 in 2026. Then there is the disputed 1997 magazine entry, which reportedly identified a 21-year-old Meghan Markle in Los Angeles. That would suggest an earlier birth year, but only if the entry can first be authenticated and conclusively connected to Meghan. Then comes Samantha Markle. Her statements have kept the age controversy alive, yet her own published material reportedly contained 1981 as Meghan's birth year. That contradiction matters. It means Samantha cannot be presented as the person who produced an unquestionable alternative answer, and this is where it gets interesting. Meghan's own reported family age calculation creates another discrepancy, while stories from her childhood have generated questions about dates and ages. The Humphrey yogurt story, the Yasmin Bleeth anecdote, and the Procter & Gamble story each introduce details that critics say do not fit perfect with the commonly reported timeline. But none of those details is a magic key. A childhood memory can be imperfect. A magazine can contain an editorial mistake. An online profile can change. A remembered date can shift over decades. What we have is a collection of disputed evidence, conflicting statements, questionable timelines, and unanswered questions. Some pieces deserve scrutiny. Some may have innocent explanations. And some claims circulating online go much further than the evidence allows. That distinction matters because this story can become sensational very quickly. The available material does not conclusively establish that Meghan was born in 1976, 1977, or any other year instead of 1981. It also does not prove that her 45th birthday,
and as I say, this is her 45th birthday,
was deliberately false. So, what has Samantha exposed? Perhaps not a secret birth year, but a timeline that people believe deserves another look. Her accusations pushed old records back into the spotlight, and once those records were compared, the questions became difficult to ignore. And now we arrive at the simplest answer. If the timeline is straightforward, an authenticated primary birth record should settle it. Until that happens, the mystery remains exactly a mystery. So, what do you think? Did Samantha expose Meghan's real age? Or did she simply reopen a controversy that still lacks definitive proof? And what do you think the conflicting timeline means? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.